In the early days of the first Trump administration, the Me Too movement swept the country, launching a reckoning over sexual harassment, abuse, and power. 7 years later, Donald Trump's picks for his cabinet and his senior staff stand in direct defiance of that movement. As Peter Baker writes in the New York Times, the kind of accusations that took down titans of Hollywood, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Washington, the news media, sports, and state capitals have proved no obstacle in Mr. Trump's election process. Rather than be deterred by such allegations, though, Mr. Trump seems determined to force a fight over them. Joining us now, MSNBC political analyst Juanita Tolliver, Peter Baker, and Lisa Rubin are still with us. So, Peter, let's talk a little bit about that. You write about the defiance of the Me Too movement. I wonder, is it intentional, given that Donald Trump ran directly at men in his last campaign, the RNC, how machismo it was, going on these bro-y podcasts where there was a lot of anger over the role that men felt they were now in this country. Is it intentional for Donald Trump to choose these folks who have these spotty histories, or is it that when their spotty histories have come out, he's standing by them even more firmly?
Well, it's certainly not a dark mark against them as far as President-elect Trump is concerned. Now, he might not have known about Pete Hegseth's allegation when he made that choice, but of course that speaks to the lack of vetting here. The normal president would have at least looked. But he certainly knew about Matt Gaetz's allegations. That's been pretty public now for the last few years, and he decided to go with them anyway. He certainly knew that RFK Jr. had been accused by a former family babysitter of groping her. That was in a magazine this last July. A simple Google search would have indicated that. He certainly knew that there was a lawsuit against Elon Musk's company for creating a hostile workplace environment, or at least he should have known that because, again, it's a public document. It's been written about. So, you know, I think whether he's intentionally picking people because of this or simply just not disqualifying them because of it, obviously it's getting into his head. Remember, of course, he's the first president ever to come into office having been found liable himself for sexual abuse. He was found liable in a civil court last year of sexually abusing E. Jean Carroll in the 1990s. That's never happened before for an incoming president. So certainly from his point of view, since he denies that still to this day, he is much more willing to accept denials from the people like Pete Hegseth and Matt Gaetz, and in fact to view them perhaps as he views himself, which is to say somebody who's persecuted, somebody who's treated unfairly, somebody who's been, you know, a victim in his view of the Me Too movement. So I think he wants to force that fight because it is part of that male-oriented campaigning round.
What does this mean for the Me Too movement, Juanita?
I think it shows yet another spike in the uphill battle of cultural conversations about what it means to be accused of sexual assault and the conversation around believing survivors and creating environments to stop this. I say that with the underlying understanding that Donald Trump is bringing these individuals in. As Peter noted, he may not have known about some of their history, but he knew about a lot of it. And he's bringing them in because this is the environment he's looking to foster in his next administration, under the guise of what appealed to his voters, which were that, oh, men shouldn't be targeted for this type of behavior, right? Like this goes back to 2016, Katie, right? Like this is his trend and historic behavior and view of how women should be treated from his own mouth. And I think one of the things we've talked about in the past, Katie, is how his administration is kind of bringing in an edit undo button in terms of what is culturally accepted and cultural norms. And while the Me Too movement has been behind creating safer environments or taking down individuals who have been found liable of sexual assault and sexual violence towards women, Donald Trump is saying, hey, they shouldn't be canceled out. They should be welcomed in. And he continuously says he's bringing in the most brilliant individuals. Sadly, this is a representation of that. The other point I do want to make, Katie, is a lot of the conversation around Matt Gaetz dropping out of his consideration for becoming the next attorney general. Some people are saying, oh, maybe this is a stress test for what Republican senators are willing to accept. I counter that with looking at these other nominees and looking at who may replace Matt Gaetz, because I think those Republican senators might have looked at Matt Gaetz as the target where they could say, okay, this is a step too far, especially with the latest reports. But the reality is they still will have to take votes on these other individuals who have sexual assault or sexual abuse allegations against them. And that is something that I don't have confidence in.
Well, I want to get to some more of the allegation against Pete Hegseth with Lisa in a minute, but I want to ask you another question about the Me Too movement, because agree or not, there are those out there, and it does include women, who felt like maybe the movement went a little too far. The pendulum swung a little bit too far in one direction. I wonder, how does the Democratic Party fight this now, fight this, these allegations that are facing these cabinet picks, fight the movement away from believing women and taking this stuff seriously? How do they do that without looking to the ones that lost faith in it, that they are being reactionary?
I think some of the behavior, especially in response to Susan Wild after that committee vote yesterday, is important. Because what she emphasized when she came out and said, hey, no, the committee did not agree to not release this report. We are still split in this decision. That's why we have a December date to come back and meet again. She called out the truth because transparency is the key here. So I think Democrats have a role in shining a light on the internal machinations behind these nominees, telling these stories, emphasizing what's at stake here and what it would mean in a Trump administration if these individuals do ascend to their positions, because that is important too for the American public to keep front of mind as Donald Trump supports and continues to support these nominees.
Yeah, so we got into the Hegseth allegations a little bit at the top of the show, but there's more to what the accuser said happened to her. Mm-hmm. And when she said she realized that something was wrong, can you just lay out a little more of what we learned from this police report?
Sure. The accuser for Pete Hegseth was attending a conference in Monterey, California for the California Federation of Republican Women. She was 30 years old, Katie, at the time. She was there with her husband and her two small children who attended with her because, as her husband told police, they were very close and they didn't want to be apart. She continued to text her husband all throughout that evening. We know that because there are screenshots of their text exchanges in this police report. And as late in the evening as 12:30 at night, they are still texting back and forth about her activities, telling one another they love you, joking around back and forth as husband and wife will. Sometime later that evening at around 1:15, that's when the accuser's memory is not perfect. And she says she remembers being out at the hotel pool with Pete Hegseth and having a little bit of an argument about how he was treating other women that evening. The next memory she has is being in a hotel room that was unknown to her, where she continues to say no as Pete Hegseth is forcing himself upon her. She then has her next memory of him, and I apologize because this is a family program, of having sexual intercourse with him and her ejaculating on her stomach. And the next thing she remembers is going back to her hotel room and falling asleep in bed with her husband at 4 a.m. She told police she believes that she was drugged, that while she had had something to drink, she doesn't believe it was the effect of intoxication. And she maintained all along that she did not willingly have sex with Pete Hegseth. And I want to note that one other difference between Pete Hegseth and Matt Gaetz, for example, and some of the other folks that Donald Trump has been associated with, including Donald Trump himself, Pete Hegseth never denied that he was engaged in a sexual encounter with his accuser. He told the Monterey Police Department that they had consensual sex, that she led him back to his hotel room, and that she immediately regretted the act and showed signs of regret, although he didn't elaborate on that. But this is a woman who is happily married with two small children, standing upstairs or on a different floor of the hotel. There's just something here that doesn't quite add up with respect to Pete Hegseth and his accuser. The Matt Gaetz situation was far more fraught. His accusers, while very young women, were also engaged in sex work at the time. And so if the Matt Gaetz story was a bridge too far for many Republican senators, I wonder how they're going to receive this woman if and when they have to confront the reality of her story.
And I would imagine that this would come out in the confirmation hearings. At the very least, this police report.
Absolutely.
All right, Lisa Rubin, Juanita Tolliver, Peter Baker, thank you very much.